All right, now, it has been yet another week in which politics has played the primary part, as you would expect. But it has also been a week in which tax cuts, government spending, and the response of the parties to the economic and fiscal and cost of living crises of the time have been ever present and every day. The Minister of Finance has had another crack at National's tax plan today. Obviously, they're not going to give up on that. They say yet again that National's tax plan doesn't stack up, and that the costs or that the savings that are going to be provided to New Zealanders from Nicola Willis, presumably bringing in a budget sometime, are illusory, that they are not going to affect the majority of New Zealanders or give them anything like that. But John Key's come out, as we know today, in saying that he wishes people to vote a strong majority. It's Grant Robertson who says that National's tax plan is a scam. Apparently, an analysis by the Council of Trade Unions, go to the unbiased people, will show that just 3,000 households would receive a $250 a fortnight relief touted by National, which is going to an average family. Joining us to talk about all these issues and more is our outstanding and resident columnist, Craig Stobo. Craig, nice to have you on again, mate.
Good afternoon, Michael. How are you?
I'm well. Listen, yesterday I did the breakfast show for Sean yesterday, and I had the chief executive of Universities New Zealand on, Chris Whelan, and we were talking about obviously the latest Times higher educational rankings and things like that, and he mentioned how important the rankings were, irrespective of whether you think they are compiled rightly or not. He said they are critical in terms of attracting students. I don't remember them around in he said it wasn't just for universities, he said, but also for departments within universities as well. So I gave the example of psychology. He said, well, there's a good example. You go and you see which are the best schools or departments, universities teaching psychology around the world. You can get into that kind of granular detail as well. And he said how important they were, though, in terms of attracting overseas students, and that overseas students basically fiscally made universities work because they provided the additional income for which to employ high-profile staff and do different things at universities. Would you agree with that?
For offshore students, yes. Domestic, I don't think it's as big a factor for many. And certainly within universities themselves, how well departments perform in those criteria is helpful for garnering scarce resources between departments. So I would agree with that.
Yeah, and the other thing I asked him about, Craig, and you'll have a view on this because you're the taumata of the Otago University Business School, was that I said there are too many universities, and he said, oh, no, it's not enough. He says, proportionately we're the same as Australia. And I said, yeah, but they're richer than we are. But he then said he did agree, and they were looking at doing some working at trying to get proper cooperation between universities in New Zealand, teaching particularly undergraduate subjects. Long overdue, isn't it?
Yes, you'd think that there'd be some degree of, for example, middle back office administration sharing, for example, between universities. The front can sort of stay with the relative brands and their various schools within the universities. I think there's a fair degree of cooperation already. From my observation, from what Otago does, depending on the discipline. So you have joint research papers, you have joint pitches to the Endeavour Fund at MB by universities jointly. So I think the cooperation is actually reasonably strong, maybe not well known by the public, but academics do tend to consult and review each other's work.
It's just that I was thinking undergraduates. I mean, you and I know from our undergraduate years, you don't need an awful lot of intellect to have an undergraduate degree, even less now. So there's sort of commonalities in terms of what you're teaching. You'd like to see, wouldn't you? In commerce would be a good example, but the arts as well. You'd like to think that you could if you're at Otago University, say that Auckland University head of, I don't know, medieval history or marketing or something like that, say he's good at his job, has the ability to teach undergraduates online, for example, a particular course.
For sure.
That sort of stuff.
Yeah, I mean, that's right. The digital world, the virtual world is a challenge to the university business model, but it's also an opportunity. I was doing a course in modern and contemporary poetry, believe it or not, at the University of Pennsylvania's kind of poet department, call it Alphyrus school, and I don't know how many were online, maybe 7,000 of us around the world, but that's the opportunity. You've got specialist subject matter. You can reach the world, not just domestically. So can they cooperate with each other? Yes. How would they share the revenues? Don't know. But that would mean reaching a much bigger audience with a more productive outcome than trying to get smaller numbers of students per university. You could increase the scale of how a lecturer or a course could reach students here and overseas. I agree with that.
Oh, well, so it's a lot more work to do in that area. He also talked about the chronic underfunding of universities, but that's not going to go away, is it?
Well, they had that chronic underfunding issue a year ago, and at that point there was quite a few universities looking at shrinking their staff roles and thinking carefully about courses, which is the right thing to do. It's what any business person would do. You right-size the business for the revenue in front of you. And then the government, I think it was a $350 million injection into the system to make the problem go away, but it hasn't gone away. It's just delayed it, in my view. What they need to do is rethink productivity, rethink how they can get to greater number of students here and overseas. So that is the challenge that's still in front of them, and they're going to have to right-size at some point, or do more with the same amount, either way you look at it.
All right. Well, I mean, that's true of everything at the moment, isn't it? You've got no more money. It doesn't matter what it is, health, education, transport. You're just going to have to apportion it differently.
Correct. You've got to be smarter about budgeting. So on that sort of note, should we just swing to the OCR and implications of that for where we think the parties are reacting with their policies to this environment? Should we do that?
It's what you want to do. I'm not going to stop you, Craig.
Okay.
You hungry enzyme, you?
All right, let's go. So the official cash rate yesterday stayed the same at 5.5%, no drama. But people may not realise that other parts of the interest rate marketplace are reacting. The 10-year New Zealand government bond yield is now 5.5%, which is a dramatic rise in the last 6 weeks following overseas markets. So investors are selling bonds in the anticipation that interest rates stay higher for longer. And that's a key theme that we all need to think about. This inflationary pressure is not going to go away in the short term. And the Reserve Bank noted that yesterday with their comments. A prolonged period of subdued activity is required to reduce inflationary pressures. That's the same as what they said in August. They said the average mortgage on outstanding loans continues to rise, and debt servicing costs as a share of income are still increasing. So that puts pressure on those who are borrowing. It's obviously very good for savers. Don't forget, a part of the marketplace comprises savers, and they're benefiting from these higher rates. The interesting thing was that in the near term, the RBNZ agrees that the risk of greater resilience in domestic demand remains. What they mean by that is that the economy is still too strong, in their view, in the near term. In the medium term, they can see the impact of interest rates slowly starting to impact on budgeting, as you and I have just discussed. However, that kind of called a look-through statement. So we'll look through the short term on the basis that in the long term we're right. However, mid-October there's an election. And as we know from the pre-FU and from the IMF, the Labor government is basically still stimulating the economy. Their pre-FU numbers had an operating deficit that was getting worse. Mm-hmm. And as we know, their net debt to GDP numbers are going from 18% when they came into office, moving to 40% over the forecast time horizon. So you then ask the question, well, on the basis of the polls, which came out last night, which reaffirms last week's similar poll, it looks like a centre-right government, not the Labor government. Labor are gone on 26%. So you have to look at the centre-right policies, and we know from the Mood of the Business Room survey, 85% of businesses want a National Act government. Only 5% want a New Zealand First national government.